Michael was only 17 when he walked into a room full of adults who had already decided what young talent usually meant. He had a borrowed jacket, a voice that didn't match his age, and a calm smile that hid how hard his heart was hitting his ribs. The audition was scheduled for 15 minutes, but less than 3 minutes in, someone cut him off. They said, "That's enough." What happened next changed everything. It was 1976 in New York City, in a midtown office building where the elevator smelled like cigarette smoke and expensive cologne. The sign on the door didn't say, "Dreams happen here." It said something far colder, a company name in brass letters, the kind that made young artists stand straighter the moment they read it. Michael arrived early, too early. He'd been taught that being late meant you didn't want it enough. So he waited in the hallway outside the audition room, listening to muffled voices through the door, watching performers come out with forced smiles and stiff shoulders. Some walked quickly like they didn't want anyone to read their face. Others lingered, pretending they weren't crushed. Michael kept his hands folded in front of him, trying to look calm. Inside, he was counting his breaths. When the coordinator finally opened the door and called his name, the hallway seemed to go silent. Michael took one step, then another, and felt the strange shift that happens when you cross into a room where people decide your future without knowing your life. Inside, the audition room was not a stage. It was a boardroom, a long table, 3 executives, a casting coordinator with a clipboard, a pianist sitting off to the side like a piece of furniture, a tape recorder ready to capture mistakes, a water pitcher nobody touched. They had already seen dozens of teenagers that morning. Some could sing, some could dance. Most could do one well and the other fine. The executives were tired. You could tell by the way they didn't even pretend to smile anymore. Their eyes had that "show me something new" look people get when they've heard the same chorus too many times. "Next," the coordinator said, flipping a page. Michael stepped in. He didn't stride in like a star. He walked in politely, almost quietly, because at 17 he had already learned a strange truth. If you enter a room too loudly, they decide you're trying to prove something. And if you enter too softly, they decide you're not worth noticing. So he found the middle. He stood at the mark on the floor. "Name?" one executive asked without looking up. "Michael," he said. "Michael Jackson." That got a few eyes to lift. Not dramatically, but enough to say, "We've heard of you." Not everyone was impressed. Some people in that world didn't like artists who came with history. They liked blank slates, because blank slates were easier to control. The coordinator glanced down. "You're scheduled for 15 minutes, she said. "Song first, then movement." Michael nodded. "Yes, ma'am." One of the executives tapped a pen as if to say, "Don't waste time." The pianist looked at him. "Key?" Michael thought for half a second. "E flat," he said. One executive raised an eyebrow at the confidence in that answer. Another made a small note, as if confidence itself was something to be measured. The pianist began. Michael started singing, soft at first, controlled, not trying to win the room with volume, trying to win it with truth. He kept his shoulders relaxed, his jaw loose, his breath deep. He sang like he wasn't begging to be chosen, like he was offering something. The first line didn't shock them. The second line made the coordinator stop writing. By the third line, the executive in the center, silver hair, expensive watch, leaned forward slightly like he was hearing something he couldn't categorize. The room's temperature changed, the way it does when people realize they can't label what's in front of them fast enough. Michael wasn't just singing in tune, he was phrasing, he was shaping words like they mattered, he was putting emotion into the spaces between notes. He didn't rush, he didn't decorate. He made the song feel like a story that had already happened. And then, at exactly 2 minutes and 47 seconds, the silver-haired executive lifted a hand. "That's enough." The pianist stopped instantly. Michael stopped too, mid-breath. For a split second, the room tilted. That sentence usually meant one thing in auditions. "You're done. Thank you. Next." Michael felt his stomach drop, but his face stayed calm. He'd learned to keep disappointment off his skin. "Yes, sir," he said quietly, lowering his eyes. The coordinator cleared her throat, already reaching for the next file. But the silver-haired executive wasn't looking at papers. He was looking at Michael. "Come closer," he said. Michael blinked. "Sir?" "Closer." the man repeated. Michael stepped forward carefully. He could hear the small scuff of his shoe on the carpet. In that room, even tiny sounds felt loud. The executive turned his head to the others at the table. "Do you hear that?" he asked. One of them scoffed lightly. "Hear what?" The executive tapped the table once, like a judge calling order. "That kid," he said, "is not auditioning like a kid." The room shifted. The coordinator's posture changed. The pen in her hand stopped moving. Even the pianist looked up, curious now. Michael stayed still, unsure if this was praise or a setup. The executive looked back at Michael. "How old are you again?" 17, Michael answered. The executive nodded slowly. 17, he repeated, like the number didn't fit the sound. Then he said something that made the whole room wake up. "If I let you sing 15 minutes, he said, everyone after you will sound like they're doing karaoke." A small laugh escaped one of the other executives, surprised. Michael didn't smile yet. He didn't trust it. He waited, like he was standing on thin ice. The executive leaned back. "So here's what we're going to do," he said. "You're going to do the hardest part now." Michael's throat tightened. "Yes, sir." The man gestured to the open space near the piano. "No music," he said. "No safety net, no band, no spotlight, just you." The coordinator frowned. "Why?" "Because I want to see if it's real," the executive said. Then to Michael, "Dance." A few seconds earlier, Michael thought he was being dismissed. Now he realized he was being tested in a different way. Prove it without the machine. Michael nodded once. He took a breath and listened for a rhythm that wasn't playing anywhere except in his head. He placed his feet, shifted his weight, and began, quietly, controlled, like he wasn't trying to impress. His feet hit the accents perfectly, but not in a stiff way, like the music was pulling him forward. His shoulders rolled with that impossible smoothness that looks like it shouldn't be legal. His timing wasn't just correct, it was musical. He took the same combination everyone else in the room would have done and turned it into something that felt personal. One turn, one pause, one snap, then a tiny adjustment, a half step back on the beat that made the whole phrase look cleaner, sharper, more alive. The room stopped breathing. Derek, no, the executive's assistant, accidentally inhaled too loudly and then froze like she'd broken a rule. Michael finished the phrase and stopped, breathing evenly, eyes forward. Silence. Then the executive in the center stood up, not clapping, not smiling, standing like he had to change his position just to handle what he'd seen. He walked around the table, slowly, stopping in front of Michael. "You know what you are?" he asked. Michael didn't answer. He wasn't sure he was allowed to. The executive said it anyway. "You're a lead." The other executives looked at each other. One of them sat back, suddenly less powerful than he had been 5 minutes earlier. "A lead?" another executive repeated, skeptical. The silver-haired man nodded. "Not someday. Not if he develops. Right now." Then he turned to Michael and said the sentence that would rewrite the next year of his life. "Can you come back tomorrow?" Michael's eyes flickered, barely containing shock. "Yes," he said quickly. "Yes, sir." The executive nodded, almost satisfied. "And bring your mother," he added. "I want her in the room when we talk." Michael swallowed hard. "Okay." The coordinator finally found her voice. "So, he's through?" The silver-haired executive looked at her like she'd missed the point. "He's not through," he said. "He's just starting." Michael walked out of the building a few minutes later, and the city air hit his face like reality. Horns, footsteps, cold wind cutting between buildings. People rushed past him with their own problems, not knowing a decision had just been made in a room upstairs. Michael stood on the sidewalk for a second, not moving, because his brain was still catching up to what had happened. He hadn't been cut off because he wasn't good enough. He'd been cut off because they had heard enough to know he didn't belong in the audition pile. He belonged in the conversation after it. He found a payphone at the corner and held the receiver for a second before dialing, as if even calling his mother might make it too real. Then he dialed anyway, and when she answered, his voice was quieter than usual. "Mom?" he said. "Yes, baby?" He swallowed. "They said..." "That's enough," he began, still half afraid it had meant rejection. Catherine's voice sharpened with worry. "Oh, Michael!" "No," he said quickly, relief and disbelief mixing together. "Not like that. They said it because they want me back tomorrow." A pause. Then Catherine exhaled, long and careful. "Okay," she said softly. "Then we go tomorrow." Michael looked up at the tall buildings, the gray sky between them, and felt something shift inside him. Not arrogance, not triumph, just the quiet knowledge that one short phrase had almost broken him, and instead had opened a door. Because sometimes that's enough doesn't mean stop. Sometimes it means we've seen it. Now show us who you are when it matters. If this story stayed with you, please like and subscribe and share it with someone who needs a reminder that rejection isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's recognition in disguise. Have you ever had a moment that looked like failure but turned into a doorway? Tell us in the comments and hit the notification bell for more untold, documentary-style stories from the world of music.